In 2003, a classified reconnaissance aircraft designated KESTEL-9 vanished during a surveillance operation above the Arctic Circle. Officially, the aircraft never existed. No flight plan was logged, no launch record was filed, no pilot was assigned, and yet at 2:14 local time, 3 separate NATO listening stations recorded the same final transmission from KESTEL-9. A single voice, calm, male, unfamiliar. It said, "KESTEL-9 to command. I have visual on the second aircraft. It is directly above me." There was no second aircraft scheduled anywhere in that sector. 7 seconds later, KESTEL-9 disappeared from radar. No distress call followed. No emergency beacon activated. No wreckage was found until 19 hours later. At 21:33, a Norwegian recovery team located the aircraft embedded nose first in a frozen ridge, 140 kilometers east of its projected route. The crash site made no sense. The fuselage was mostly intact. Minimal fire damage, no sign of explosive decompression, no evidence of missile impact. It looked less like a crash, and more like the aircraft had been forced straight down. The cockpit canopy was fractured. The pilot seat was empty. That detail was immediately flagged in the recovery log, because KESTEL-9 was never built with a pilot seat. It was a remote reconnaissance platform, autonomous, classified, controlled entirely from a ground relay station in northern Finland. There should have been no cockpit controls, no life support, no manual override, and no pilot. But the wreck contained all three. The recovery team logged the discrepancy at 21:48. At 22:03, command ordered the cockpit sealed and all visual documentation classified under War Echo Directive 9. At 22:17, something else appeared on site. Thermal scopes picked up a moving heat signature approaching from the eastern snowfield. One human figure, walking, alone. The recovery team initially assumed it was a local survivor, maybe a downed civilian from another aircraft. Then the figure got closer. It was wearing a black pressure suit. Military issue, no visible blood, no obvious injuries, no frostbite, no distress signals, just one man walking through sub-zero wind toward the wreckage of KESTEL-9. When challenged, he stopped at 30 meters, raised both hands, and identified himself. Lieutenant Daniel Voss, Recon Flight KESTEL-9, requesting immediate debrief. Silence followed, because everyone on site already knew the problem. KESTEL-9 had no pilot. The recovery team detained him at gunpoint and moved him into thermal containment. Initial field observations noted the following. His suit matched no active NATO aviation kit. His rank patch was obsolete. His oxygen rig had no manufacturer markings, and the insignia on his shoulder had been burned away from the inside. He showed no signs of hypothermia despite exposure conditions that should have killed him in under an hour. His pupils responded normally. His heart rate remained stable. His body temperature was elevated, 39.1 degrees Celsius. No explanation was recorded. At 23:10, Lieutenant Voss was transferred to Site Helios for emergency debrief. The first interview lasted 11 minutes. It was terminated early. Transcript excerpts were later flagged under restricted clearance. The opening exchange was simple. The interviewer asked him to identify his mission. Voss responded immediately. High-altitude surveillance, signal interception, shadow track confirmation. He spoke calmly. No confusion, no visible trauma, no hesitation. Then the interviewer asked him to identify his launch origin. Voss answered, Kestrel Air Station, runway 2, northern ice shelf. There was no Kestrel Air Station in NATO records, no runway, no ice shelf installation, no archived base designation. The interviewer assumed cognitive trauma and continued. Then Voss was asked the name of his commanding officer. He answered instantly, Commander Elias Ward. That name triggered the first hard stop in the room. Commander Elias Ward had been declared dead in 1981, 22 years earlier. Official cause of death, decompression failure during a classified surveillance operation over the Barents Sea. His service record was sealed under War Echo. The interviewer ended the session at 2003-21. At 2003-43, a secondary review of Voss began under biometric verification. Voice print analysis was run against all NATO pilot records. No match. Facial recognition returned no active personnel. Dental comparison returned no military registry. Fingerprints returned partial conflict markers from 3 separate deceased service members. All 3 had died between 1979 and 1987. All 3 had served under programs later folded into War Echo. At 014, internal review escalated to containment protocol. At 022, Voss was questioned again. This time he was asked about the second aircraft, the one he mentioned in the final transmission. For the first time, Voss hesitated. Then he answered, "It matched our altitude for 11 minutes. No transponder, no thermal bloom, no visible cockpit." He paused, then added, "It maintained formation above us without propulsion." The interviewer asked him to clarify. Voss looked directly into the observation glass and said, "It was waiting for us to look up." The recording paused for 6 seconds. No one in the room spoke. The interviewer then asked the obvious question. "What did he see?" Voss answered, "Our aircraft, already there." The room went silent again. The interviewer asked him to explain. Voss leaned forward in his restraints, then said, "Same designation, same body, same signal, same call sign." He swallowed once, but it was above us first. The session ended at 031. At 046, Site Helios lost power on sublevel 2. Backup systems restored after 19 seconds. During that outage, security footage from holding room C went dark. When visual feed returned, Lieutenant Voss was still seated in containment, motionless, but no longer alone. Frame review later showed a second silhouette standing behind his chair, tall, human-shaped, unmoving. There was no door entry, no badge access, no thermal signature entering the room. The figure appeared in blackout and vanished before backup power restored. At 049, Voss began speaking again. No question had been asked. He was staring at the glass and repeating the same sentence over and over. "It followed the return path. It followed the return path. It followed the return path." At 052, containment staff entered the room. Voss stopped speaking, then smiled. The attending officer later stated that was the first moment everyone in the room understood something was wrong. Not because of what he said, because the man smiling at them was not the same face they had entered with. The change was subtle, but impossible. Jawline lengthened, cheek structure altered, eyes set deeper into the skull, not dramatically, just enough for everyone present to notice, and freeze. The room was evacuated at 053. At 104, Site Helios entered full internal lockdown. At 111, every radio inside the facility activated simultaneously. No input source was found. All active channels began transmitting the same cockpit audio recovered from KESTEL-9. Again and again. KESTEL-9 to command. "I have visual on the second aircraft. It is directly above me." At 113, one additional line appeared in the playback. A line absent from the original recording. A second voice, low, distorted, directly behind the pilot. It said, "Look up." At 114, all personnel on sublevel 2 lost contact. At 126, Site Helios initiated Black Archive containment. At 340, the entire Kestrel program was erased from active NATO registry. No aircraft, no mission, no pilot, no recovery. Lieutenant Daniel Voss was removed from all internal documentation at 412. Officially, no such individual was ever recovered. The KESTEL-9 wreckage was dismantled in pieces and transferred under sealed convoy. Its final storage destination remains redacted. Site Helios was decommissioned 6 months later. No public reason was given. The surviving personnel were reassigned under restricted silence orders. 3 resigned within the year, 1 disappeared in transit, and 1 submitted a final sealed statement before transfer. Only 1 line from that statement remains unredacted. It reads, "The aircraft we found in the ice was not the one that came down." Officially, the KESTEL-9 incident was classified as signal corruption caused by autonomous guidance failure. No further investigation was recommended. No public record exists. War Echo File K9 remains sealed. But in 2011, a civilian weather satellite briefly captured an unidentified thermal bloom above the same Arctic sector where KESTEL-9 disappeared. The image showed 2 aircraft signatures, one below, one directly above it, matching speed, Matching heading. No visible propulsion. The upper contact vanished 6 seconds before the lower one did. The image was archived, flagged, and sealed. No explanation was filed. And one annotation was added by hand across the final report. 4 words: "Do not look up."